We're starting the second panel with somebody I think who has the highest impact now on what will be happening in the offshore sector. I personally know Paula Abreu for 12 years at least, and absolutely I'm perfectly sure that the renewable sector is now in the best possible hands in the EU. So Paula, I will pass the floor to you with one question. What should we expect from the European Commission in the coming days and months? We have the offshore strategy, but now we're looking forward to some concrete and precise instrument that's going to be introduced by the Commission to support the offshore wind sector. Paula, the floor is yours.
I'm very pleased to kickstart this panel that will look into how to unfold the offshore wind potential in the Central European region. Reaching 55% of greenhouse gas emission by 2030 and attaining carbon neutrality by 2050 requires scaling up renewables at a very fast pace. I think here we all agree. And all member states will have to contribute and have an interest to contribute. As we see, it's offshore energy, and in particular winds, can really give Europe the necessary push to attain our energy and climate objectives. And this region gathers what we consider to be our big hopes for an enlarged circle of EU countries leading in offshore wind, extending the pioneering efforts from Denmark to important investments that we see in Germany and the Netherlands, with impressive plans in Poland for 2050, but also if we move to the Baltics, where we look at the dynamics in Lithuania, but also Estonia, and partnering with Latvia, and further down if you go to the Black Sea. So we see a lot happening, and an interesting confidence on the potential and also on the merits of exploiting this potential, and really how we see that in this region unfolding this potential can really place these countries in a forefront position in the renewables development and also the innovation efforts. And this will no doubt bring industrial activity, stable jobs, and also very important, can help support increased public acceptance to the energy transition and also to renewables. And I think we should capitalize on that. Now, you asked me what is the Commission doing over the next days or months or years. I thought about that, and there is a lot, as you know. I mean, those of you who have looked at the work program of the Commission for next year, I mean, I think you're already getting excited and stressed at the same time. So to start with, you just saw it, I guess. I mean, it will be all the time referred to in along today's event, the offshore renewable strategy adopted 2 weeks ago, and is explicitly looking at all the EU sea basins, so not only the North Sea, and also it's looking at all renewables technologies. I mean, not only wind actually, and this is really opens the chapter of offshore, how to untap this huge potential of offshore renewables, and there are a number of follow-up actions that the Commission will be implementing. And here I would like perhaps to mention some of the key highlights, let's say, in our program of activity that you will be following from your end. First of all, we have kickstarted an important legislative revision, as you know, and this is aimed at making our policy and regulatory framework fit to the ambition of a 55 greenhouse gas reduction by 2030. And if you look at renewables, and based on the comprehensive impact assessment of the climate target plan, this leads us to reach figures between 38 to 40% share of renewables in final energy consumption by 2030. You can compare that to the agreed EU target of at least 32%. That's what we have today. So there's an important increase, and we all need to work towards that. And this is where we see a huge room for the offshore, as I said at the beginning. Some of the legislative revisions that you will see coming is, I mean, now and before Christmas, the revision of the 10E regulation. I will not go into details on this, since my colleague Joachim will be there for the second panel, and we will be broadly talking about this. But I mean, perhaps I would like to focus on more on what I've been dealing with, which is the revision of RED II, so the recast of the Renewable Energy Directive. As you remember, this is a directive from 2018, and we will be looking at that again and revise as much as needed. So to reflect the increased ambition that we need for 2030. And of course, we will be looking in the preparations to all possible measures that we'll need to either revise or bring in line with what was already announced in the system integration, energy system integration, and the hydrogen strategies. So we will look at ways to incentivize greater renewables uptake in the industry and building sectors, also in the transport sector, always bearing in mind the need to secure regulatory stability and previsibility. And also an area that we'll be perhaps analyzing in detail is how to encourage further cross-border and joint projects. And this is, again, an area that for offshore is very, very important. As you know, as you may know, we are now currently on the stage of impact assessment for the preparation of the revision that the Commission has indicated for June, to be tabled in June next year. And we have actually launched already the open public consultation, and this is open until early February. On the 11th of December, we'll have a major stakeholder event. So those of you interested, you can get the information in the links in our website. In parallel to this, and as you for sure know, the Commission is also has also started the process for the revision of the state aid guidelines, and the roadmap for this has been published, is now open to public, to the stakeholders' opinions and contributions. At the same time, we are very busy also with implementation of the RED II, the 2018 directive, and following closely the work that is being done by the member states in terms of implementation and transposition. And there are very important measures in RED II that are particularly critical for the offshore renewables. And here I'd like to say those related to permitting, simplification of procedures, PPAs, and also other new measures. So these are all very important if we really need a leapfrog in offshore wind. Next to legal frameworks, as been always the case, the Commission has always been ready to support member states and also private developers to nurturing ideas for joint offshore projects. And this is possible with the new window that the future Connecting Europe facility will have. So the renewables window, and where we can provide support for studies investigating the benefits of this cross-border cooperation, and also to support member states' efforts in setting up the necessary agreements that are on the basis of these projects. Also, as announced in the offshore strategy, we will also provide guidance on how to coordinate, and this is under preparation, how to coordinate the sharing of costs and benefits across the borders for hybrid projects. So this is something we are working on now that you can expect to see. Perhaps my last point relates to the encouragement that we give to member states to duly consider offshore investment needs and regulatory reforms as part of the national resilience and recovery plans. This is a very important piece of work that we have been following very closely, and this could, for example, include a scaled-up ambition for offshore wind compared to the national, what was indicated in the national energy and climate plans, can include additional tendering and national laws for offshore deployment, but also anticipatory investments into grids or the port facility upgrades and others alike. In relation to this, and really this is my last point, I would not like to finish before referring to it, to the union financing mechanism. So this is a mechanism that the Commission put forward, that it is included in the governance regulation. and that will become operational as of January next year. And this is again a very interesting mechanism and an option for offshore projects. And member states can be able to account a contribution into this mechanism from the recovery grant. So there is a linkage to the recovery grants, and then get statistical transfers as a contribution to their national renewable contribution to the EU targets. And I stop here. I think I gave you a broad overview of what is coming, specifically relevant for renewables and in particular the offshore wind. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Paula, very much.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you, Paula, very much. And now I will go to Giles Dickson, without whom a discussion on offshore wind and on wind at all wouldn't take place in the EU. I think he's the voice of the whole industry in Brussels. Giles, my question to you is, what is the industry expecting from the European Commission and from the legislation in place? The floor is yours, Giles.
It's great that you're having this discussion on offshore wind in the Central and Eastern European region. The European Commission said in their offshore renewable energy strategy, 300 gigawatts of offshore wind across Europe, across the EU, by 2050. WindEurope have analyzed what is the optimum breakdown of that 300 gigawatts in terms of geographical potential, grid connections, where is the demand for energy? And our assessment is that out of 300 gigawatts, Poland should have 28 gigawatts by 2050, Lithuania 4 gigawatts, and there should be significant volumes also in Latvia, Estonia, Bulgaria, and Romania. And Paula, one of the many very good things in the Commission's offshore strategy was your singling out the Black Sea and the huge potential for offshore wind there. Now, your exam question, Mariusz, how do we make this happen? What do national governments, what do the EU need to do, crucially, to incentivize and deliver the huge volumes of investments that are going to need to happen to deliver these volumes? Now, Jerzy Buzek said to us just a moment ago, offshore wind is very capital intensive. Absolutely right. And therefore, to minimize the costs of offshore wind and to unlock investments, it is crucial to minimize the costs of financing offshore wind because it is so capital intensive. We borrow loads of money up front before we are earning any money from the generation of electricity. So it's crucial that governments put in place auction schemes which provide some sort of revenue stabilization mechanism, such as a two-sided contract for difference, so that the industry, when they've won an auction, can go to the banks, they can go to the equity investors and say, look, I have stable revenues for the first 15 years or so of my project. And then the banks will lend lots of money at low rates of interest. If you go to the banks and you say, well, I don't know what my revenue is going to be, because the auction I bid into, it allowed for zero bidding, and well, we bid at zero, we won, but it means my only revenue perspective is the wholesale electricity market price. The banks look at that and they are much less willing to lend money. And if they do lend you money, it will be at much higher rates of interest. You will have to be financing your offshore wind farm much more from equity, which is much more expensive. The numbers are this. If you've got a two-sided contract for difference, you will be 75 or 80% debt financed from the banks. Good, at low rates of interest. If you haven't got a contract for difference and your only revenue perspective is the market price of electricity, then you will only get 25% of your finance from the banks, and you'll be needing equity for the other 75%, which is much more expensive. How does this impact on the total cost of doing offshore wind? The offshore wind farm that has a two-sided CFD will have an average levelized cost of electricity of around 50 euros. The offshore wind farm that does not have a CFD, that has bid into a zero auction, only has market revenue, will have LCOE of 92 euros a megawatt hour. That is the stark difference. And that's why it's so important that governments should apply contracts for difference. And it's fantastic that Poland and Lithuania are applying contracts for difference for your offshore wind farms. And it was very good also, Paula, by the way, the very clear statements that were in your offshore strategy about the importance of revenue stabilization mechanisms to minimize the financing costs and therefore minimize the total costs of doing offshore wind. Hybrid offshore wind farms. Paula has talked about this. It's very good that the Commission are supporting this, that there are going to be guidance to member states on the cost-benefit analysis when governments that are hosting a hybrid offshore wind farm that will have grid connections to 2 or maybe more countries, that the Commission is going to give them guidance on how to do the cost-benefit analysis. That's very good. We hope that there will be joint auctions, and there'll need to be some guidance from the Commission to member states on how to do those joint auctions, of course, for hybrid offshore wind farms. Again, contracts for difference would be the best model for that. We mustn't lose sight also of the key role of the European Investment Bank. Under the EFSI, European Fund for Strategic Investments, the so-called Juncker Infrastructure Investment Plan in the last Commission, the EIB put huge money into offshore wind. Now, the successor to EFSI is InvestEU. We don't know what the final amounts will be for InvestEU, but it might be less than EFSI. It's one of the things that was cut in the recovery plan negotiations, and we're a bit worried about this. We need to make sure the EIB has the necessary firepower to support offshore wind, because when you got the EIB lending money to an offshore wind farm, that brings in the private investments. It shares the risk, and the private investors are much more ready to put debt and equity into a wind farm that has EIB supporting it. 2 other observations on hybrids. There must be clarity on the legal framework. Today, wind farm developers are very reluctant to invest in hybrid offshore wind farms because of the famous 70% rule. Yep, because they simply worry that the electricity they're producing will get crowded out by the 70% rule and the fact that the TSOs at either end of what is a de facto interconnector with their offshore wind farm in the middle are going to need to be trading electricity, and they won't be selling as much as they would have liked. So you could have standalone offshore bidding zones, yes, but if that applies, there needs to be a revenue perspective for the offshore wind developers, which means a redistribution of congestion rents. That requires a change in EU regulation, probably. That change needs to happen as soon as possible. And until it's changed, then if you really want offshore wind farm developers to invest in hybrids, you're just going to need to give them an exemption from the 70% rule. Final observation, it's so important that national governments invest in grids, the offshore grid connections and the reinforcements of the onshore grids that are crucial to accommodating in the onshore grid system all of the electricity that's going to be coming from offshore wind farms, and invest also in ports. Port infrastructure. Ports are essential to the build out of offshore wind. All the equipment goes through ports, but we need more ports with more infrastructure to accommodate the huge expansion of offshore wind that is coming. Some governments are putting ports in their national recovery plans already. I would recommend that governments in the Central Eastern European region do the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Giles. I think that's a great resume of what the industry is expecting from the public institutions, mainly the EU institutions, but also the financial institutions and banks. I think that to sum up, the 2 main points is money, which is very important for these investments, and secondly, the stability of the EU legislation and the regulatory framework. I think these are the 2 main issues that you have touched upon, and I encourage our colleagues who are listening to us to also check an interview that CEP has done with Giles, and it's now available on our website in the SIP report for Q3, Q4. The interview was much more comprehensive because it took us 40 minutes with Giles, and we had a very nice discussion also on the contract of difference, which I must say was very eye-opening from the point of view of also our colleagues in Central Europe. So I encourage you to read through this. And thank you, Giles, for all the insights. I think that we will have a lot of discussions on the topics that you have touched upon in the coming days. And we can now move to the representatives of the industry, who are also very interested in how the offshore strategy will be put in place from the practical point of view. So I would move to our next speaker, which is Madame Morawiecka from PGE Baltica. PGE Group, the Polish main energy company, has just issued a new strategy in October, which depends very heavily on the renewable technologies, including also the offshore wind technologies. So we would be very happy to hear from the representatives of PGE on, first of all, what are the plans of the group? And secondly, what do you expect from the EU institutions and Brussels in general with respect to supporting the development of offshore wind?
First of all, let me thank you for invitation to this panel, very interesting panel. And I'm actually thrilled that all the important points from the industry's perspective have already been actually raised by the previous speakers, so there's not much to add. But let me tell you a bit about our new strategy, because I'm really excited to be able to talk about that, because I think you might appreciate that this is a revolutionary strategy from PGE. Why is it so? Just a few weeks ago, we announced at the group level that we will aim for climate neutrality by 2050, and we will aim for supplying all our customers with 100% renewable energy. As you might know, PGE is the largest energy group in Poland, supplying over around 40% of electricity needs in Poland. And this is largely coal-based electricity by now. So our ambition to move fully towards renewable energy by 2050 is, I think, something that maybe not everybody expected from us, which makes me very happy to be able to announce that that is in fact our strategy. And the main pillar of that strategy is, in fact, offshore wind. And I'm really thrilled to be able to lead the offshore wind business line of PGE Group that has very ambitious plans for developing offshore wind in the Baltic Sea. And thank you, Giles mentioned that Poland has the potential of reaching 28 gigawatts in the Baltic Sea by 2050. Currently, we're concentrating on a bit smaller number, of course, but we need to start somewhere, and this somewhere is not small at all, because as Mr. Czetwertyński was saying before, Minister Czetwertyński, Poland aims to have almost 6 gigawatts installed capacity by 2030, starting from zero now, starting from Offshore Wind Act being now passed by the government and put through to the parliament. And this Offshore Wind Act is, of course, something we've been in the industry waiting for some time, eagerly. And this really is a fantastic development on the side of the regulatory landscape, that this really gives visibility to all investors. What also Giles was saying on the certainty of revenues, on the long-term visibility on two-sided CFD, all that is needed for financing, as you rightly put it. Now, coming back to where we stand at PGE, we are currently developing 3 projects, big projects, altogether 3.5 gigawatts. 2.5 we need to and want to install by 2030. I'm not putting here an exact date because it's always tricky, but definitely mid-20s will be out in the sea. and the further 1 gigawatt after 2030. But this is not our full ambition. We announced in the strategy recently that our ambition by 2040 is to have 6.5 gigawatts installed capacity. This is, of course, really, really ambitious, but we do want to be a leader. We do want to be a leader in Poland in energy transformation, in particular in offshore wind development. So that is, broadly speaking, our goals. And we, as all the other investors, are, of course, have the challenges of optimizing lots of things at the same time. We're optimizing our schedules, we're optimizing CapExes, we're optimizing risks, we're optimizing quality, and last but not least, which has not been mentioned here yet, and I think it is very important for Poland, we try to optimize local content in these projects as well. Because as you know, the goal of the Polish government is not only to have this offshore wind development as an energy policy program, but it is an industrial program, it is an economic program. And supporting and developing local supply chain is of utmost importance for the Polish government and for us as PGE. So these are the challenges ahead. We are again thrilled to see the Offshore Wind Act moving through the government, and we do hope we will get there where we want to be. So 6.5 gigawatts by 2040 is the ambition of PGE. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monika. We're waiting anxiously to see the results of this new strategy. I think what is important, the important topic you have touched upon is indeed the local content. I think that for most of the member states from Central Europe, it is very, very important to create jobs and create new opportunities for industry in their own countries, and not to export the capacities to the other countries of the European Union. So we're hoping that with the strategy that PGE is undertaking, we will also see the developments of a number of smaller companies that will work on this renewables project in Poland in the next 30 years. Yes. Thank you very much, Monika. And we're now moving to a bit north to Estonia with Hando Sutter from Eesti Energia. Estonia and Latvia has just recently signed an agreement to cooperate on the renewable offshore development, and I think this is a major breakthrough from the region, also from the Baltic states. So we are eager to hear from Hando how this will develop in the coming months. Hando, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation for Central European Energy Partners. I think the topic is very relevant and a very distinguished audience. My view is a little bit even more practical, and as we are today already the biggest wind generator in the Baltic area, then I can speak a little bit about daily practice and then also what kind of plans we have and what are the major challenges as we see it. First of all, we are operating today in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. We are also having development projects in Finland, altogether 400 megawatts of wind farms. And still remember that actually we are talking here about offshore winds, but still onshore wind is cheaper, and it means that it's more competitive. So we are having today operating parks, and we are having still plans to develop also onshore wind. We are having quite several solar parks, as you can see on the slides, mostly in Estonia and Poland, and some bio CHPs and also waste to energy generation. Then this is where we are aiming. You can see our current operations, what is our short-term plan. This is mostly about the onshore wind and the solar, so that by 2023 we should be over 1 gigawatt capacity already, and then longer-term pipeline reaching maybe then by 2030 up to 3.6 gigawatts. And it's split between the countries from Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania to Poland. And I think that our pipeline today is one of the most developed pipelines in the region at all. Then coming a little bit more specifically to the offshore winds. Here you can see Estonia, Estonia West Coast. We are having two offshore projects. One is on the northwest Estonia, close to the shore of island Hiiumaa, and another one is closer to the mainland, southwest, which is, we call it Gulf of Liivi. And I will talk about this project a little bit closer. So the project, actually, just to give you some dimension of the time needed to prepare such a project, we have been working already almost 10 years. We have reached two very important milestones, so that we have maritime planning done. We have some environmental impact assessments done, and so on. But still we see that even if we will go ahead with a very high speed, then actually investment decision can be achieved somewhere by 2025. And one more thing to mention, that budget or investment of such a project is around 2 billion euros and potential generation around 4 terawatt hours. You can see that there is also one interesting element, that this is located really at the border of Estonia and Latvia, so that basically there was a talk before about hybrid parks, then this is the one. Really see and hope that among those political investments, political support which has been coming up recently, we can develop it together with Latvian partners. Then butt sides. Here I should remember to all of us the sizes of the electricity markets where we are all located. The green one, big one, is Germany. So you can see that if we want to find from here Estonia or Latvia, we are almost invisible. We're around 8-9 terawatt hours yearly market. Lithuania a bit bigger, Finland 87 terawatt hours, and Poland much bigger, 162 terawatt hours. So if I mentioned our one single offshore park, which is generating alone 4 terawatt hours, this is half of Estonian yearly consumption. If I go ahead, then this is the based on WindEurope, the latest information available about the actual investments to offshore wind. You can see that this is not the latest trend. It has been up and running over the last 10 years. But somehow we don't see any upward trends. We see quite a stable tendency, and even last years it has been coming down. And my rhetoric question is that what we should do different to boost it up and see remarkable increase as we have been talking today. There is one thing which is obviously the challenge, and it was also a little bit stressed by the previous speakers. This is a situation a couple of weeks ago in Europe, and we all remember that this was very windy week, not very cold, quite a warm November. So there was a lot of wind generation, and demand was not so high. And we saw through the week actually extremely low power prices. We saw negative prices. We saw zero prices through weekends even in many areas. Obviously, if we're talking about investment against such a market of such amount of additional wind generation, this is not encouraging too much. Then another thing, which was also touched a little bit by the previous speakers, but I'm going even more specific. Here on the screen you can see a printout, and it's a small shrift. Sorry if you can't read it, but basically this is from urgent market messages from the same week when it was windy in Northern Europe. And what we can see from here is that actually TSOs have massively actually reduced the interconnections between the price areas and countries. This is between Sweden and Poland. This is between Sweden and Denmark, Sweden and Germany, Sweden and Lithuania, and so on. And if we see a reasoning which is most important, the reasoning is due to too high wind generation. So, and not much more explanation. this is very, very bad tendency and sending very bad signal to any wind developer. So where I want to reach, actually, we need a well-functioning market to plan such a huge investments as we have heard today. And we need very clearly to state and remember that there is a massive role of TSOs and regulators. TSOs, they have to make sure that there is a transparent and a working marketplace, and also interconnection capacities which are available always. And the regulators, they need to make sure that they check how it works and they interact if something goes wrong. This is extremely important. And if this works, then actually two things will happen. Investments will come to generation sites, also offshore wind, and the customers will get the best deal. Always. So this is so important, but unfortunately, we see a little bit backwards developments at the moment on the market. And my takeaways, as I said, well-functioning market is needed. TSOs and regulators, they have a role, and international agreements, cross-border subsidy schemes, auctions are needed. Otherwise, as operators, you saw that we are operating in many countries. We are going for a cherry picking, and this is obvious. Everybody will do this, so that we are going to give a priorities to those projects which are in the areas where we're having better schemes, and this is not then following actually where this power is needed or other incentives. So we support technology neutral approach and the cross-border schemes. Thank you.
Thank you, Hando. I think that's an extremely insightful presentation on the practicalities and the problems that are encountered by the project developers. As we have already touched upon briefly, there are a number of regulatory challenges that probably will be solved by either the European Commission in the new legislation or by ENSOs. So I think it's a very good place and time to show these problems to the public and try to reach out to our decision makers to see whether they can do something about it, and also to reach out to the TSOs. Our next speaker is Rolandas Zukas from EPSO-G in Lithuania. And if I understood correctly, you have already, Rolandas, finished for Lithuania a new study concerning the options for integration of renewables, including offshore wind farms, into the system, and how this integration could affect the price of electricity in Lithuania and the Baltic states. So maybe you could, first of all, give us some insights on this study, and secondly, try to reach out also to the companies which will be the project promoters, like Eesti Energy, to answer a few of the questions that Hando has already put on the table. Rolandas, the floor is yours now.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Mariusz, for the invitation and opportunity to speak in this event. So I will start from the few words as Jerzy Buzek have mentioned, that we undergo some development, and we in Lithuania really undergo development. We have started our energy strategy development from the security, from the safety. Now we talk about the competitiveness, and in the future we think about the sustainability and independence. This will not happen without new renewable investments, and we need a lot of the renewables to reach our goals. As our minister have mentioned previously, so Lithuania is already in the process of the implementation of new regulation, which is addressed to the offshore wind development potential. So next year, at the beginning of the year, during the second quarter, we expect to go through the parliament and to pass through the parliament new legislation on the offshore wind regulation. So as Mr. Giles have mentioned, so we need contracts for difference that will work in both sides. So this is our structure of the regulation. And the infrastructure part is also, as it was said, so in our case will be developed by the transmission system operators. So we are reflecting these challenges that were mentioned earlier, and we, as it was mentioned, we expect the auctions of the offshore wind capacity about 700 megawatts to start 2023. So for the investment, for the new investors or potential investors, this is, I think, really important information. And I expect, Hando, that we will have a bit less than 10 years for the development of our offshore wind first project, which is a bit less than Levy. So we are talking about 700 megawatts. It's not far away from Estonia, I think, so you will participate in this auction. So the potential in Lithuania is up to 3 gigawatts. And this brings new challenges. As it was mentioned, we have done some studies and have made some predictions how the energy market in Lithuania and in our region will develop for the next 20, 30 years. And we see that by introducing more renewables, the potential for the capture price of the renewables is decreasing. And the costs of renewables potentially won't be able, the renewable investors won't be able to cover the cost without subsidies. So subsidies are needed. But there is another one trend that if we introduce into the network flexibility options like batteries and power to gas, the business case and the price and capture prices, they are improving. So in total, we see that with the doubling of the onshore wind and the growing up to 7 gigawatt hours of the offshore wind by the year 2050, we will have to start introducing from the year 2030 power to gas units that will balance the fluctuations in the grids in order to avoid negative prices. And also what is important that power to gas is also a competitive solution to the lithium batteries, to the storage solution. And I just remember recently Mr. Elon Musk said that he is against power to gas. He is against hydrogen because why to waste energy for the hydrogen when you can charge the batteries? So this is good news for us, for the consumers, because if there is a competition, I expect that there will be solutions and there will be good prices. So my message is that Lithuania is actually investing in the offshore wind, and our transmission system operator, as it was mentioned earlier, has a concept to develop necessary connection points in the offshore territory. So we expect to develop the offshore territory close to the Latvian border in the north of Lithuania. It's about 30 kilometers away from the shore and potential up to 4 gigawatts hours. So gigawatts, not gigawatt hour, gigawatts in the future. So first start is 700 megawatts. The TSOs will have to cooperate by developing this area, and our TSO is planning to cooperate with the other regional TSOs to include the network development, which is necessary for the offshore in the 10-year network development plans in order to be able to get financing as a common and as a projects of the common interest, and also use recovery and resilience funds for that, because without help, our ambitions cannot be reached. So we need a strong commitment from the European Union to dedicate certain amounts and certain funds for that offshore development. So yeah, more or less, this is my presentation, that we really doing the steps towards the decarbonization and the sustainability in Lithuania, and first auctions year 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolandas. It's a very happy place to be as a moderator of the panel, because each of the panelists are introducing new specific topics to the discussion. And I think that the point that you have raised on the competition between renewable technologies is I think something that is extremely important for the development of the renewables themselves, also for the offshore sector, because as we've seen, for example, in Hando's presentation, there are various types of turbines. If I remember correctly from Hando's presentation, there is not yet a decision which kind of turbines will be used in this wind projects in Estonia. But what we are now expecting, and I think a number of experts are talking about this already here in Brussels, is that we're going to see different turbines being installed, and with time we'll see more efficient and probably bigger turbines for the offshore sector to be in place. And that is, of course, as you said, a very good indication of the competition on the market, and also competition between the technologies like hydrogen and batteries. So it's a very good point, and thank you for that. And now I would like to draw attention to a more European perspective. The next speaker is Mr. Grzegorz Gorski from Ocean Winds. I think as we've had speakers from the region for the time being, it would also be good to hear on a more broader European perspective, because it's not going to be only the regional companies that are investing in the offshore, either in Baltic or in the Black Sea or Adriatic, but also the more European type companies like Ocean Winds. And we'll be very happy to hear from you, Grzegorz, on what do you see should be the conditions that the member states put in place, especially in Central Europe, to develop the sector more rapidly and in line with what the EU is expecting. Grzegorz, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation. So if you allow me first, maybe a few words about Ocean Winds, because Ocean Winds is a new company. The company was established in mid-March this year, and it's a joint venture of ENGIE, where I spent most of my professional career, and EDPR, 50-50 global and exclusive joint venture. So, as I told you, the joint venture company was created in mid-March. It's based in Madrid, so halfway between Portugal and France. And all the teams from both sponsors and projects from both sponsors are being transferred. In fact, we are completing this process today. The stake in Steamate in Belgium, farm which is close to completion of construction, is being transferred, and that's the last one. So Ocean Winds is not only a European player, but a global player. They are our top 4 markets today. Looking on the size of the pipeline is UK and France, in Europe, US, and South Korea. And we are active practically in all global markets, with ambition that by 25 we become tier 1, so let's say top 5. We are not yet there, so a lot of activities in origination and creation of a development options. So where Central Europe is in this picture? So Central Europe for us is first the Baltic Sea, and here I would start that we see a lot of potential in the Baltic. We are not the only one. I think many of our peers welcomed and witnessed in person, like I did, signing of the Baltic Sea Declaration, which was 2 months ago in Szczecin, which is similar to something which was signed a few years ago for the North Sea, and we see the progress done in the North Sea. So let's hope with the Baltic Sea Declaration signed by 8 Baltic countries, we will have strongly supported by the private sector. We will have similar progress, aiming at, I hope we will be close to 100 gigawatt in the Baltic Sea by 2050. So what is ocean wind here? Our main focus in the Baltic is on Poland. We didn't formulate like PG our ambition for 2040, but I would say a few gigawatt also. We have one relatively small project, 400 megawatt, in the first tranche of the governmental program. So it's included in this phase of let's call it regulated CFD, and few more early stage bigger projects which we are preparing for further auctions. Apart from Poland, we are also looking at Lithuania. We have partnered with Ignitis to bid together for the forthcoming Lithuanian tender, and Ignitis also joined us in one of our UK projects, and we have been welcoming now Ignitis team members in the project team. So these are the two, let's say, examples which I can share, but of course, in the origination activity, we are looking also in other Baltic countries. So certainly, I expect there will be more. In this aspect, also, I think it's important to mention the local supply chain about which Mrs. Morawiecka talked earlier. I like this will be a quote from Giles Dickson. Giles, I hope you don't mind. Poland is the only country which doesn't have yet the offshore wind sector, but has the supply chain already. Because this is true. I see a lot of Polish companies working on our existing projects in Belgium and in the UK. And it's not only, Mariusz, as you said earlier, smaller companies. Because if you take Telefonica, for example, well, Telefonica is now a global leader in cables for the Telefonica with acquisition of JLR, became a global leader in export cables and also inter-array cables. So there will be certainly more companies growing in the way Telefonica did, and apart from this, I think there will be also a lot of investment in Poland of established international players, and they will invest because there is demand. So with the governmental program, with the clear vision and clear targets, and ideally also clear auction calendars, that's the best thing which the governments can do for creation of local supply chain visibility, and one and second, prepare infrastructure for investments, and this infrastructure should be our ports. So offshore wind now is about scale. Everything is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which means you cannot manufacture this inland. It has to be manufactured directly on the board of the sea, that you can load it on a vessel and go to Marshalling Harbor or directly to construction site. So to attract some of the most sexy investments, which are turbines, of course, we need this harbor infrastructure so terrains ready for such investments to come. And as we have the program and visibility on future demand, these investments will certainly come. Apart from the Baltic, because Central and Eastern Europe is not only Baltic, as you rightly mentioned before. Of course, if you talk about Adriatic and Baltic Sea, it's less advanced. Generally, the Mediterranean region, the peculiarity is no continental or little continental shelf, which means that we probably won't be able to go for bottom fixed technologies. But floating offshore wind is something which we are in OW very bullish, and we develop in many geographies. So we have also the technology work. What we need now is scale. Because people say it's expensive. Yes, it's expensive because we are comparing price of 25 megawatt pilot with say 3.6 gigawatt Dogger Bank. It's not. This is not a fair comparison. The comparison would be only fair if we compare with size of project which is comparable. And why this is so important? I told you it's all about size. Size about machines and size about of projects. So just I'm always using a quick rule of thumb rule. Each time you double the size of park, your LCOE is going down 10% or more. But you can use as a rule of thumb is 10%. So you can easily calculate what's the difference between 25 megawatt and 3.6 gigawatt for like. Okay, thank you. So I finish here.
Grzegorz, sorry, yes, but we need to.
I'm passionate, as you see.
Yeah, thank you for paying attention to me because we need to indeed stick to our time. But I think that, again, as with Rolandas, the case was that you have brought up a very, very specific topic to our discussion that I wanted to flag to our colleagues, also looking through the list of attendees, that it's not only the countries who has the seashore that will be interested in developing offshore, but also countries like Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, who don't have their seashore, but can be a great place for the production of materials and production of subparts for the offshore wind farms. Yes, we have been observing also this trend in our part of Europe. And I think that with this Central Europe, not only the countries which indeed will have the offshore farms, but also the countries which won't, can benefit in total from the development of this new and exciting sector. So thank you, Grzegorz, also for flagging this. We're looking into the investments that ocean winds are going to be doing in our part of Europe, especially in the Baltic, of course, but also colleagues from Romania and Bulgaria, I think, are looking closely on your plans there. And this brings us to an end of the first panel. We have just 5 minutes, I think, for question and answer session. So if our attendees would like to drop a quick question, that would be, you can do it in the Q&A section of our conference on the right of your screens. We have one question to Paula Abreu-Marques. I hope that you can still hear us. It's not really a question dedicated to the offshore wind, but rather the recast of the Renewables Directive that Paula has mentioned in her intervention. So the question from one of our attendees was whether the Commission has already any ideas on how to touch upon e-fuels in the renewable recast. In the Renewable Directive recast. So Paula, I can see you're still with us. So if you can just jump on this very quickly, we would appreciate. Paula, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marius. Thank you for the question. As you can understand, we are still at the early stages of the so-called impact assessment, where we are outlining all possible policy options that we'll be evaluating. I would invite you to suggest the participant to look at our open public consultation. So it is this very comprehensive questionnaire, and you will see there all the areas we'll be looking at least analyzing options. Doesn't mean that we'll be touching all these. Important perhaps to refer in this context is that so we are revising for a number of reasons. First of all, because we need to increase the ambition, but also because we need to have a much more integrated energy system, as it came out from our strategy of July, and also to pave the way for a hydrogen ecosystem. And so all these two strategies also hinted with follow-up actions that determine or require us to look at related provisions in the directive. So we can expect, I mean, to be looking at the fuel side of the directive. That's obviously now in which terms, to what extent, it's still under analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula. That was extremely helpful, I think, for the colleagues who are joining our conference and are looking into what the Commission is planning. Thank you for that, Paula. So for all of us, I will finish up the first panel now. I wanted to express my greatest appreciation to all the panelists. I think your insights was extremely useful, and we really enjoyed having this talk with you.